Welcome back to Economics. In case you forgot what class you were in, this is the first video of week 6. So hopefully in your week 5 packets, you're able to turn in your 2 homework assignments, your chapter 10 define quiz, and your chapter 10 test. Now as the first video of week 6, we are at Roman numeral 2, the functions of the Federal Reserve System. If you guys remember, we've talked about who creates the money at the beginning of the chapter, followed by the organization of the Federal Reserve System. So now we're going to get into more details as to what does the Fed actually do. By the way, this is the topic of an essay, though honestly you don't need to worry about that because you'll have your notes to take the test. But just to remind you, this is the topic of an essay, so maybe you still want to star this, highlight this, circle this, write essay next to this. Be familiar with the fact that this is what we're going to be doing. The Federal Reserve Act of 1913 specifically stated that the Fed was created to provide for the establishment of Federal Reserve banks to furnish an elastic currency, to afford means of rediscounting commercial paper, to establish a more effective supervision of banking in the U.S., and for other purposes. Well, with that definition in mind, you can imagine they have a lot of power. In keeping with this act, the Federal Reserve System exists to perform 6 national economic services. Letter A, provide a uniform and elastic currency. Let's define elastic currency first, actually. It is a currency that can expand with the economy. As the economy grows, the need for more money grows with it. I mean, we understand that. There is more money today in the U.S. than there was 100 years ago, or 50 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 10 years ago even. A uniform currency means the money is universally the same and accepted by all. I think we already know that one, but just in case, that's what you need to know about it. Today, for example, we use the Federal Reserve note, and we've talked about that. We've showed you what a Federal Reserve note looked like, and we went into great detail studying our money. The Federal Reserve System does not create these notes. The Bureau of Engraving and Printing under the U.S. Treasury prints the notes, and the Federal Reserve places them into circulation through its 12 district banks. So one function of the Federal Reserve System is that it provides a uniform, means the same, and elastic means it can grow currency. Letter B, regulating member banks. Another function of the Fed is to regulate member banks. Member banks of the Fed enjoyed certain benefits, such as free checking clearing and free currency and coin delivery, as well as many burdensome requirements, such as the reserve requirement, which we talked about previously. As the regulations grew more oppressive, member banks withdrew from the state banking authorities, from the Fed, and put themselves under the less demanding regulations of the state banking authorities. The number of banks fleeing the Fed alarmed Congress, so they passed a law called the Depository Institutions Deregulation and Monetary Control Act of 1980. First of all, that's a long name for a law. Second of all, here's what it did. This law required all banks to abide by the Federal Reserve. So whether you were insured through the Fed or whether you weren't, just by the states, now they all had to abide by the Fed's requirements. This legislation gave the Fed greater influence in the financial sector of the U.S. economy. Letter C, clearing checks and debit card transactions. The 20th century saw the rise of writing checks. In the 1990s, $95 out of every $100 in business transactions was a written check. So 90%, 95% of all money going from here to there back in the 90s was a check, not cash. Today, even more popular is the use of credit cards, debit cards, and electronic funds transfers. After all, when was the last time you bought something with cash? Well, some of you students may still only have cash on hand, but you can imagine that when you get older and the convenience of a debit card, credit card exists, most purchases will be done with these electronic purchases. In order for the transaction to take place, the receiving business or institution must send each transaction to the bank that holds the purchaser's account for payment. In other words, you have a bank for Wells Fargo. You have an account for Wells Fargo. You want to buy something at Walmart. You go to Walmart, you scan your card, you put your card through, you either do the chip or the slide, whatever it is, and at that moment, usually it will say, purchase approved, and you're on your merry way. Well, how did they do that? Well, they quickly, I know it was all electronic, quickly checked to see that you actually have the money to make the purchase. If there was a reason why your bank chose to cancel out your card, they might do that as well, but that's what would take place. They would say purchase denied, and then you'd have to call your bank and find out why. Letter D. Another function of the Fed is to act as the fiscal agent. In other words, what can a bank do for you? They hold my money. Yes, but banks do a lot more than just hold your money. You might want to write this down. It's noteworthy to do so. A fiscal agent is defined as one who accepts customer deposits, makes loans to borrowers, and offers financial advice to those requesting it. The Federal Reserve System acts as the government's bank. In other words, question might be asked, how? So we just defined what a fiscal agent was in that previous thing. Now we need to know, how does the Fed act as the fiscal agent? Number one, it holds the U.S. Treasury's checking account. The IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, the government's tax collector, deposits all revenues into the government's checking account at the Fed. And out of this account, the government pays its bills. And number two, it makes loans to the U.S. Treasury. It has the Federal Open Market Committee, of which we've talked about, the FOMC, which purchases governmental bonds. And lastly, number three, supplies the government with economic information and advice. Letter E. Another function of the bank is that it serves as the banker's bank. How much currency is in paper or coin form? Well, the answer is a lot. But here another question is, how much of our money is in paper or coin form if you include checks, debit, credit cards, etc., or electronic format? The answer is not much. Most of our money is in check form or electronic form. What happens if more than a usual number of people demand their money from a bank? We've talked about this before. You might have a run on the bank. Definition of a run on a bank is a panicking situation in which depositors rush to the bank seeking to withdraw their money when the bank cannot meet their withdrawal requirements. If this happens, the bank may face insolvency and failure. Part of the purpose for creating the Fed was to prevent such panics. How? By becoming the lender of last resort. See, sometimes if a bank is short on cash and they have no way of collecting the income from their customers. They have no way of collecting their debts from the people who they've made loans to. They can always ask the Fed for more money, the lender of last resort. Worth noting, I don't remember if this is a term that you need to define or not, but this is what you need to write down about it. The Fed creates and lends enough currency to banks to allow them to satisfy their panicking depositors. That's what the lender of last resort does. They get the money from the Fed so that they then will prevent this run on the bank. That's all the material that we're going to cover for today. We've got one more function of the Fed in which we will spend that time tomorrow talking about it. Hope you all have a good rest of the day. Be good, do good. Bye.